Tonight, we step into a story that was never meant to be about enlightenment. This story does not begin with visions or revelations. It begins with work, with routine, with a quiet laboratory where the goal was not escape, but repair. What followed was not prophecy, but human choice. Fear has a way of disguising itself as curiosity, and hope, when pressed hard enough, will accept almost any solution. Tonight's story is not about rebellion or art or madness. It is about a tool created to heal the mind that slipped its restraints and learned how to travel. Before we go further, if stories like this matter to you, stories that examine how good intentions fracture under pressure, consider staying with us and share your thoughts as we move forward. The problem that haunted the mid-20th century was not spectacle, but silence. Soldiers returned from war unable to sleep. Patients sat in hospital rooms trapped inside spirals of despair. Psychiatry had diagnoses, but few cures. Therapy moved slowly. Drugs dulled symptoms without touching causes. Minds were breaking faster than doctors could mend them. So researchers searched for shortcuts. Not to pleasure, but to access. To pry open the locked doors of trauma and let language finally reach what memory had buried. The idea was simple, almost compassionate. If suffering lives in the unconscious, then perhaps healing must go there too. In this atmosphere of urgency, a compound emerged almost by accident. It was not designed as an escape. It was catalogued, labeled, shelved, then noticed. Small doses produced something unexpected, not numbness, but amplification. Thoughts loosened. Emotions surfaced. Patients spoke differently. Not faster, not louder, deeper. At first, this looked like a breakthrough. Sessions that once took years compressed into hours. Alcoholics confronted themselves without denial. Depressed patients described relief not as happiness but as clarity. Therapists were cautious but hopeful. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that psychology had found a lever powerful enough to move the mind without breaking it. But here is the first question to consider, and I invite you to pause and reflect before continuing. If a treatment reveals the truth too quickly, is that healing or intrusion? Share your thoughts in the comments. The compound did not stay confined to clinics. Researchers talked. Samples circulated. Papers were published with cautious optimism. The lab door did not burst open. It was left ajar. Once outside, the substance encountered a different environment, one primed by social tension, political anxiety, and generational exhaustion. Young people were questioning authority. Old institutions were losing credibility. War footage entered living rooms. Trust eroded. Into this climate drifted a chemical that dissolved boundaries and made meaning feel urgent. What had been measured in milligrams became measured in movements. The science did not change, but the context did. In controlled settings, preparation mattered, guidance mattered, intention mattered. Outside, those safeguards dissolved. The same mechanism that allowed trauma to surface also made suggestion dangerously powerful. A mind opened is not automatically a mind protected. Experiments multiplied without oversight. Charismatic figures reframed chemistry as philosophy. Insight became identity. Experience replaced evidence. For some, the substance became a sacrament. For others, a weapon against conformity. For many, simply a risk they did not understand. At this point, pause again and consider when personal freedom conflicts with collective safety, who decides where the line is drawn? Let me know what you think. Institutions responded the way they often do when control slips, not with nuance, but with force. Research funding vanished. Papers were buried. Careers ended. What had once been a promising therapeutic avenue became untouchable. The compound was no longer a tool, it was a threat. But suppression did not erase it. It pushed it underground. Without research, myths flourished. Without education, misuse spread. Some users reported lasting psychological damage. Others swore their lives had been saved. The data fractured into anecdotes, each louder than the last. In the absence of structured knowledge, extremes dominated. And while the culture argued, ordinary people paid the price. Not celebrities, not leaders. Patients who might have benefited from supervised treatment lost access entirely. Individuals with fragile mental health encountered experiences they could not integrate. Families watched loved ones drift into obsession or disorientation. There were no monuments to these losses, no official apologies, just silence. Here, consider another question before we move on. Is banning a powerful tool an act of responsibility or an admission of failure to use it wisely? By the time society realized what had been lost, decades had passed. New crises emerged, or crises emerged. Unpasta, Astah, and bide of war might. New disorders appeared, and slowly, cautiously, the scientific community began to look back not at the cultural chaos, but at the early data that had been ignored. What they found was uncomfortable. Under strict conditions, with screening, preparation and guidance, the compound still showed promise. For trauma resistant to conventional treatment, for end-of-life anxiety, for conditions that medicine still struggled to reach. The same substance once dismissed as a danger now re-entered the lab quietly, humbly, under rules written in caution rather than excitement. But history does not reset. Public memory is long and distorted. Fear lingers. Trust does not return easily once broken. Halfway through this story, let me pause briefly. If you value careful examinations of how science and society collide, you may want to follow along and continue the conversation. Your engagement helps keep these discussions alive. Today, the compound exists in two worlds at once. In one, it is a regulated subject of study, discussed in academic language and ethical review boards. In the other, it remains a symbol of rebellion, danger, liberation, or loss, depending on who remembers it. What unites both worlds is uncertainty, because the real lesson was never about the chemical itself. It was about speed, about scale, about what happens when tools meant for healing are released into systems unprepared to carry their weight. The victims were not chosen, they were available. Patients seeking relief, young minds seeking meaning, institutions seeking control. Each acted rationally within their own fear, and that is the final discomfort. As we near the end, ask yourself one last question. When knowledge outruns wisdom, who bears the responsibility for what follows? We return now to silence, to laboratories once closed, now reopened, to questions still unanswered. The compound waits not as a miracle or a menace, but as a reminder that survival pushes us to invent, that hope tempts us to rush, and that forgetting history does not make it less dangerous, only quieter. So here is the question that remains, unresolved and waiting. When the next tool promises to heal what we cannot endure, will we remember how easily help can become harm, or will we once again learn only after the damage is done?